Sometimes the deepest betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the dinner table. When a child is quietly pushed aside because their job isn't impressive enough, when status matters more than dignity, when a family chooses appearances over their own blood, that's not just awkward. That's cruelty dressed up as class. They say respect isn't given, it's earned. But what happens when respect is denied simply because of bias and pride? When the moment comes to choose between keeping the peace or standing up for what's right, which one truly defines a family? Before we dive into today's story, let us know where you're tuning in from. It's always amazing to see where our stories travel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next twist in this journey. Now, let's listen to her from the heart. I was still thinking about that line about dignity being denied because of pride when I found myself standing outside the cafe in Reno, watching my son through the wide front window. The place was packed. December in Denver meant people ducking in from the cold, shaking snow from their boots, lining up for peppermint mochas and double shots before heading back to offices or lofts. Inside, Caius moved behind the espresso machine like he belonged there. His hands were steady, precise. Grind, tamp, lock the portafilter, pull the shot. Steam hissed. Milk frothed. He didn't rush even when the line stretched to the door. He looked each customer in the eye, called regulars by name, remembered who wanted oat milk and who hated foam. His apron was clean black, simple. His hair was pulled back neatly. There was nothing careless about him. 20 years old. A 4.0 GPA in software engineering at CU Boulder, offers for competitive internships already sitting in his inbox. And yet he insisted on working 20 hours a week at this cafe. I could afford his tuition. I could afford his books, his insurance, his life. I was a structural engineer. I designed bridges and high-rises. I made good money. After his father died 16 years ago, I had made it my mission to make sure Caius never felt the weight of scarcity. But he had looked at me one day, calm and steady, and said, "I don't want comfort if I didn't earn it." So he worked. I watched him laugh at something Mrs. Delgado said she came in every afternoon at 4 sharp, and I felt that familiar mix of pride and fear. Pride in who he was. Fear of how the world would see him. I knew how people judged. I worked in boardrooms long enough to understand how quickly respect could shift based on what someone thought your kid did for a living. My phone buzzed in my hand. Dominic. I already knew what the call was about. Serafina. He said, his voice overly bright. "You're still coming tomorrow night, right? Christmas Eve, 6 o'clock. "Of course," I said. "Caius and I will be there." There was a pause. Not long, but long enough. "Isolde's got some big investors coming in from Texas," he continued. "It's going to be a more formal thing this year. Sophisticated. You know how she is." I leaned against the brick wall outside the cafe. "I know exactly how she is." He let out a tight breath. "She just wants everything to look polished. Cohesive." There it was. Polished. Cohesive. I didn't respond. She's worried, he went on, lowering his voice, that certain conversations might drift. About work, backgrounds. You know how people talk. You can say it, Dominic. Another pause. She doesn't want the focus shifting in ways that could affect the deal. Translation. My son working at a coffee shop didn't fit the aesthetic. He's a software engineering major with a 4.0, I said evenly. He has 3 internship offers lined up for next summer. I know that, I do, but these people see an apron I finished for him. He didn't deny it. For a moment, the cold Denver air felt sharper. I should have been angrier than I was, but what I felt was older than anger. It was tired. "We'll be there at 6, I said, and ended the call. That night, I didn't tell Caius about it. He was at the kitchen table in our house in Stapleton, carefully ironing a pale blue button-down he'd found at a Goodwill on Colfax. He had paired it with dark jeans and the one blazer he owned. He'd even bought a small gift for Isolde artisan candles from a local shop in Lodo. He'd paid for them himself. "Do you think Aunt Isolde will like these?" he asked. "She'll love them," I said. Our house wasn't big. 3 bedrooms, a narrow hallway lined with framed photos, Caius at 4 holding a stuffed dinosaur, Caius at 8 with missing front teeth, Caius at 13 with a robotics trophy, bookshelves filled with engineering manuals and programming texts. The couch sagged slightly in the middle, but it was ours, warm, honest. Dominic's place in Cherry Hills was something else entirely. 8,000 square feet, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a private lake, marble counters, heated driveway, 6-car garage. The first time I visited after he married Isolde, I remember feeling like I had walked into a magazine spread instead of a home. It hadn't always been that way. Before Isolde, Dominic used to crash on my couch. He was there the night Caius was born, pacing the hospital corridor with a stuffed bear in his hand. He'd slept in our guest room the week after my husband's funeral because he didn't want me alone. Somewhere along the way, that version of him got quieter. The next evening, I decided we would arrive 30 minutes early. It was a simple thought show, goodwill. Offer to help set up. Prove that we were grateful for the invitation, that we belonged. If we had arrived right at 6 with the other guests, I might never have seen what I was about to see. We pulled into Dominic's driveway at 5:20 p.m. The circular drive was already lined with cars that looked like they belonged in a dealership showroom. A silver Aston Martin, a black Bentley, 2 Range Rovers. The sky was fading into a pale Colorado dusk, and the house glowed from within like a display case. I parked my SUV near the edge, feeling absurdly aware of how ordinary it looked. Caius grabbed the gift bag and smiled. "We're early. That's good, right?" "That's good," I said. Isolde opened the door before we even rang the bell. She looked immaculate, deep green silk dress, diamond studs, hair swept back flawlessly, the kind of polish that took time and money. "Serafina," she said, kissing the air near my cheek. Her eyes flicked past me. "You're early. We thought we could help. Oh, everything's already handled." Her smile tightened when she looked at Caius. "The caterers arrived hours ago." Caius stepped forward. "Hi, Aunt Isolde." "Hello, Caius." Her gaze lingered for a second too long. "Why don't you just give us a moment? Serafina Dominic's in his study." I turned slightly, expecting Caius to be beside me. He wasn't. A soft metallic sound echoed somewhere along the side of the house. A garage door closing. I felt it before I understood it. "Where's Caius?" I asked. "He just stepped out for a moment," Isolde said lightly. "I suggested he wait somewhere comfortable until the guests are fully settled. We're trying to keep the environment neutral." Neutral. "You know how strong coffee can be," she added. "It lingers." I didn't wait for more. I walked down the side of the house past trimmed hedges and decorative lanterns toward the garage. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, the air was colder than I expected. 6 vehicles gleamed under bright overhead lights. A Tesla Plaid, a matte black Lamborghini, Dominic's Audi. Everything spotless. And there in the far corner near a stack of winter tires sat my son, on a folding metal chair. He held a plastic-wrapped sandwich in one hand, the logo from Conoco still visible on the packaging. He had already taken a few bites. "Hey, Mom," he said quietly. I felt something inside me shift. "What are you doing out here?" He shrugged. Aunt Isolde thought it might be better if I waited until everyone was seated. She said the smell of espresso sticks to fabric. "I showered," he added quickly. I changed. Through the interior glass door, I could see the dining room. Ilara and Knox were already at the long table. 35 place settings gleamed under the chandelier, silverware arranged with surgical precision. Isolde stood at the head of the table, carving into a golden-crusted beef Wellington, while a server poured wine. Christmas music drifted faintly through the door, warm light inside, cold concrete outside. I crouched in front of Caius. "How long has this been happening?" He looked away. "It's not a big deal." "Caius." He exhaled slowly. The first year after she married Uncle Dominic, she used to joke, called me Espresso Prince. said it with a smile. He swallowed. Second year, she put me at the end of the table, near the kitchen, said it was easier for the servers. My hands clenched. Third year, she gave me a $5 gift card to a gas station. The price sticker was still on it. He tried to laugh. It didn't work. Last year, I spilled some wine by accident. She told me to sit in the kitchen for the rest of dinner so I wouldn't embarrass anyone. 5 years. 5 years of small cuts. Why didn't you tell me? He met my eyes then. Because he's your only brother, he said, and I didn't want to be the reason you lost him. That hurt more than anything else. He had carried it to protect me. Inside, glasses clinked. Laughter rose. 35 guests lifting champagne. Outside, my son on a folding chair with a gas station sandwich. I stood up and looked through the glass again. Beef Wellington plated. Smiles polished. Investors shaking hands. Something in me hardened. You don't belong in a garage, I said. It's fine, Mom. Really. We can just eat and leave. I thought about the past 5 years, about every time I had chosen peace over confrontation, about every time I told myself it wasn't that serious. I thought about the line I had once told him, dignity isn't something you negotiate. If I stayed silent again, I would teach him that it was. I held out my hand. We're going inside. He hesitated. Then he took it. We walked through the side entrance into the dining room. Conversation faltered as we entered. And that's when I saw it. On the wall beside the Christmas tree hung a large framed portrait, Dominic Isolde Alara Knox, perfectly posed, smiling, no space left, no trace of us. That was the moment I understood something clearly. We hadn't been forgotten. We had been edited out. The dining room was designed to impress. 40 chairs framed a table that seemed to stretch the length of the house, dressed in crisp white linen and gold-trimmed china. Crystal stemware caught the chandelier light and scattered it across the walls in fractured rainbows. Place cards had been arranged with mathematical precision. I found mine near the very end of the table, second to last seat, pressed up against the swinging door that led to the kitchen. Caius's name card sat at the final chair directly beside the service entrance, where servers would move in and out all evening, not even subtle. I stood there for a moment, holding both cards between my fingers. Around us, guests laughed over cocktails discussing venture capital rounds and winter properties in Aspen. No one seemed to notice where we had been assigned, or perhaps they noticed and understood exactly what it meant. I picked up the 2 cards and walked toward the center of the table, where 2 seats remained empty, clearly reserved for the investors Dominic had mentioned. Caius caught my wrist gently. Mom. It's fine, I said quietly. I set our cards down in the middle. Isolde appeared beside me within seconds, as if she had been monitoring the table from across the room. Serafina, she said under her breath, smile intact for the benefit of nearby guests. Those seats are reserved. For who, I asked? For the Hendersons. They're leading the next development round. Then I'm sure they'll survive sitting 10 feet farther down. Her eyes sharpened. The seating chart was carefully arranged. So was mine, I said, and I'm rearranging it. The air between us tightened. For the first time in 5 years, I didn't step back. Please don't make this difficult, she murmured. It already is. Across the table, Alara leaned toward one of her friends. I heard it clearly. He smells like coffee. A soft ripple of laughter followed. Caius's shoulders stiffened, but he didn't look up. Dominic sat 3 seats down, hands folded in front of him, watching. I could see it in his face, the calculation. Investors, image, marriage, sister, son. When Isolde straightened and spoke louder, her tone shifted from silk to steel. If Caius feels uncomfortable about his current job, she said, glancing at the guests as if inviting them into the conversation, perhaps he should consider pursuing something more aligned with his long-term goals. The words were clean, polished, but they carried exactly what she intended. I stood. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat, but my voice when it came was level. My son doesn't feel uncomfortable about his job, I said. He's proud of it. The table went quiet in stages. Forks paused mid-air. Conversations thinned. He has a 4.0 GPA in software engineering, I continued. He's been offered internships with Tesla, Oracle, and Palantir. He pays for his own car insurance, his own phone bill, his textbooks. He works 20 hours a week because he believes in earning what he has. No one moved. Elara, I added, turning slightly, had to attend summer school last year after failing 2 core classes. A flush crept up her neck, and Knox was almost suspended for plagiarism. The school accepted a generous donation instead. A collective intake of breath moved around the table. Dominic's jaw tightened. "I'm not sharing this to embarrass your children," I said. "I'm sharing it because you implied my son should be ashamed." The chandelier hummed faintly overhead. No one dared speak. I turned to Dominic. "Stand up," I said quietly. "Tell them who your nephew is." He didn't move. Dominic. He looked at me as though I had asked him to choose between oxygen and gravity. "You're making a scene," he said finally. "This isn't the time. This is exactly the time. You're humiliating us. Us. Not her. Not the situation. Us." In that single word, I understood. He had already chosen. Isolde's composure cracked for the first time. "If you can't respect our home, Serafina, you should leave." I held her gaze. Around us, 35 guests sat frozen in their designer clothing, caught between curiosity and discomfort. Near the entrance, I noticed the champagne tower she had proudly described in detail earlier that week. 6 tiers of delicate crystal, each glass filled precisely to the same height, balanced in perfect symmetry. Carefully constructed, carefully displayed, and fragile. If they believed my son was a stain on their perfect image, then they deserved to see the fracture running through it. I looked back at Caius, and for the first time, I wasn't thinking about preserving anything. I walked toward the champagne tower slowly. Every step felt deliberate. Isolde noticed immediately. "Don't you dare," she hissed, abandoning her polished tone. The glasses shimmered under the chandelier lights stacked in geometric perfection. I could almost hear her earlier voice describing the event company she had flown in from New York to construct it. My hand hovered near the bottom tier. It trembled slightly. Not from fear, from finality. I wrapped my fingers around one glass at the base and pulled. The collapse began almost gracefully, a soft shift, then a cascading shatter as the weight redistributed and surrendered to gravity. Crystal met marble. Champagne surged outward in golden waves across the white oak floor. The sound of glass breaking echoed through the dining room, loud enough to silence even the air. 35 people watched the illusion come apart in seconds. I stepped back steady, my son. I said into the stunned quiet, was told to sit in a garage so he wouldn't interfere with your image. A few guests exchanged glances. While you talk about values, about legacy, about tradition. Champagne pooled around my heels. If your reputation can't survive the smell of coffee, then it was never built on anything solid. No one clapped, no one gasped dramatically. They simply stared. Isolde's face had drained of color. "You will pay for this," she said, her voice shaking now. "Every dollar." Dominic stood halfway, then stopped. "You've gone too far," he muttered. "Too far." I looked at him carefully. The man who once slept on my couch because he didn't want me grieving alone was gone. In his place stood someone terrified of losing status. "Have I asked?" No one answered. I took Caius's hand. We walked out through the front door, stepping over shattered glass. The drive home was silent at first. Snow had started to fall lightly, dusting the highway in pale streaks. "You didn't have to do that," Caius said finally. "I should have done it years ago." He stared out the window. "I didn't want you to lose him." "I already did," I said. After a moment, he added something else. "Last year, Aunt Isolde told me not to talk to Knox about coding anymore." I turned slightly. "Why?" She said she didn't want him picking up a salary mindset. Said he needed to think like an owner, not an employee. The contempt ran deeper than I had realized. We pulled into our driveway. Our house looked small compared to Cherry Hills, but it was ours. Honest, unpolished. A week later, the email arrived. Subject line: demand for damages. The amount was precise: $7,800 for imported crystal flooring repair professional cleaning. Payment required within 10 days. The tone was clinical, detached, as though we were strangers negotiating over a parking dispute. I read it twice. Then I forwarded it to an attorney. In my response through counsel, I included screenshots of Isolde's past messages, emails arranging seating, a statement from a former household employee who recalled Isolde saying Caius didn't fit the brand, records of comments made over 5 years. My lawyer suggested we consider filing a counterclaim for sustained emotional harm. At first, I hesitated. Then I thought about the folding chair in the garage. I approved it. If they pursued legal action, we would bring everything into daylight. When the official letter went out, I felt something shift inside me. For years, I had been afraid of losing my brother. Now I was afraid of teaching my son that silence was the price of belonging, and that was something I refused to pay. After my attorney sent the formal response, everything went quiet. No follow-up emails, no additional demands, no court filing, just silence. At first I expected escalation, another legal notice, a certified letter, something sharp and immediate. Instead, the days stretched into weeks, and the weeks into months. Winter settled heavily over Denver's snow, lining the edges of the sidewalks and frosting the bare branches in our neighborhood. The world felt hushed, as if it were holding its breath. Dominic didn't call. He didn't text. Not on New Year's. Not on my birthday in February. Not even when the first heavy spring storm rolled in and knocked out power across half the city. 4 months passed. Life, however, kept moving. Caius finished the semester with perfect grades. I watched him at the kitchen table, night after night, headphones on, eyes focused, toggling between code and documentation. When the official offer from Tesla's Austin office arrived, internship confirmed, housing stipend included, he didn't shout. He just leaned back in his chair and smiled quietly. "They sent the contract," he said. I walked over and wrapped my arms around him. "You earned it." He nodded once. "I know." There was something different about him after Christmas. Not harder, not bitter, just clearer. He carried himself differently, as if the night in the garage had burned away whatever doubt remained about who he was. One Saturday afternoon in late April, I was trimming back the overgrown lilac bush in the front yard when a familiar black Audi pulled up along the curb. I recognized it instantly. Dominic stepped out slowly. He looked thinner. The confident posture I had associated with him for years seemed to have collapsed inward. His suit jacket hung looser than it used to. There were deeper lines around his mouth. I didn't wave. I set the shears down and wiped my hands on a rag, but I stayed where I was, on the front porch, in my space. He walked up the steps and stopped just short of the door. "Hey," he said. "Hi." The air between us felt unfamiliar. "I wasn't sure if you'd answer my calls," he added. "You didn't make any." He exhaled once, sharp and self-aware. "Fair." I didn't invite him inside. We stood there, the lilac scent faint between us. "I filed for divorce," he said finally. The words didn't land the way he expected. There was no dramatic intake of breath from me, no visible shock. "Okay," I replied. He studied my face. "You're not surprised?" "No." He looked down at his hands. "It's finalizing. Lawyers are sorting out the assets. What happened?" He gave a hollow laugh. "What happened is that I was the only one in that marriage who thought it was intact." He paused, then forced himself to say it plainly. "She's been having an affair for 2 years." The number echoed longer than the sentence. With Cameron Holt, he continued, her financial partner, the one she introduced at Thanksgiving as the backbone of the expansion project. I remembered Cameron, sharp suit, controlled smile, the kind of presence that commanded attention without raising her voice. 2 years, I asked. He nodded. All the late meetings, the out-of-state conferences, the emergency site visits, and the investor at Christmas, I said quietly. He swallowed. Not an investor. Of course not. The irony was almost unbearable. The woman who curated image down to the arrangement of napkins had been living inside a lie for years. I found out in January, he said. After the champagne incident, actually. I was already under scrutiny from the board because of the legal tension with you. I started digging into financial transfers, expense accounts. That's when it unraveled. He leaned against the porch railing, suddenly looking older than his 47 years. I knew she looked down on Caius, he admitted. I heard the comments. I saw the seating changes. I told myself it was harmless, that she was protecting the brand, that investors were sensitive. I didn't interrupt. I chose the deal he said. Over you. Over him. There it was. I was afraid, he continued. Afraid of losing my position in her company. Afraid of losing the life we built. I convinced myself keeping the peace was maturity. It wasn't, I said. No. Silence settled again. I'm not here for forgiveness, he said. Not from you. Good, I replied. He nodded once. I need to apologize to Caius. He's at work, I said. Same cafe. He hesitated. Will he see me? That depends on why you're going. To admit I was wrong. Then go. He found Caius that afternoon at the cafe. I didn't follow them inside. I stayed in the car across the street, watching through the window. Dominic didn't ask him to step outside. He stood there in front of the espresso machine in front of coworkers and customers and said what he needed to say. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see his posture. Shoulders lowered, hands open. Later that night, Caius told me what happened. He said he failed me. Caius said, sitting on the edge of the couch, said he cared more about reputation than family. And I told him if he wants back in our lives, it's not about money. It's about showing up. No grand gestures, no checks, just consistency. I felt a flicker of pride that had nothing to do with grades or internships. What did he say? He agreed. Within a month, Dominic moved out of the Cherry Hills mansion. The property went on the market quietly. He rented a modest condo near downtown Denver. 2 bedrooms, concrete floors, no lake view. I don't need all that he told me during one of his brief visits. I never did. I believed him. But I also knew this wasn't resolution. It was exposure. The fall of a facade doesn't mean the structure underneath is strong. It just means it's finally visible. The consequences didn't stay confined to family. In certain circles in Denver, news travels quickly, especially when money is involved. By early summer, whispers about Isolde and Cameron began circulating among investors. At first, it was subtle. Delayed meetings, canceled appearances, a quiet postponement of a major mixed-use development outside Boulder. Then one of the projects was officially put under review. Shareholders questioned potential conflicts of interest. Internal audits were initiated. The narrative she had so carefully constructed, precision, control, elegance, began to crack. I didn't participate in any of it. I didn't leak information. I didn't comment publicly. I had no interest in spectacle. But I watched. I watched the same power structure that had pushed my son into a garage begin to wobble under its own weight. One afternoon, I received a call from Dominic's attorney. "Ms. Vale," she said carefully, "there's a detail in the divorce filing you should be aware of." I leaned back in my office chair. In her response, Isolde claims that Mr. Vale failed to protect the family's public image from destabilizing actions initiated by his sister. Initiated by me, I clarified. Yes, the phrasing was deliberate. I understood immediately. The Christmas dinner had become evidence, not of champagne on oak flooring, but of instability, of exposure, of narrative disruption, the garage, the speech, the collapse. It had moved beyond family drama. It was now a legal argument. I ended the call and sat there for a long moment. That night at dinner, Dominic came by our house. "Alara's furious," he admitted. "She thinks I ruined her life." And Knox, he's quieter. Dominic glanced toward Caius, who was explaining a coding concept at the kitchen table. He asked if Caius would help him understand Python. I almost laughed at the absurd symmetry. The boy who had once been told not to influence Knox was now tutoring him. Caius agreed without hesitation. "He's smart," he said later. "He just never had to try before." Dominic took it further. He established education accounts for both Ilara and Knox, but with conditions. Minimum GPA requirements. Mandatory part-time work 12 hours a week. They need to understand effort, he told me, not just access. And Isolde. "She disagrees," he said dryly, "but she no longer makes the rules. It wasn't redemption, it was recalibration. And I could see that he meant it." That summer, Caius left for Austin for his internship. The house felt quieter without him, but lighter too. He called every evening describing projects and mentorship sessions, the scale of the engineering teams, the pace. "They treat everyone the same," he told me once. "Intern or senior engineer. If you do the work, you're respected. Good. That's how it should be." At the end of the internship, Tesla extended a formal offer contingent on graduation. When he called to tell me, his voice was steady. "They want me back full-time." I closed my eyes and let the moment settle. There had been a folding chair in a cold garage. There had been a dining table where he didn't belong. There had been a champagne tower that shattered in seconds. And now there was this. The conflict wasn't fully over. Legal proceedings still moved in quiet backrooms. Investors still debated. Lawyers still drafted language. But the power had shifted. No one could edit us out anymore. No one could seat him at the edge and expect silence. And no one would ever push my son into a garage again. 6 months after Christmas Eve, I was standing in my office reviewing bridge load calculations when the receptionist called up to tell me I had been served. The envelope was thick, formal, heavy in a way that had nothing to do with paperweight. Isolde was no longer asking for reimbursement for crystal and flooring. She was suing me for defamation and intentional damage to her business reputation. I sat down slowly as I read through the complaint. The language was polished strategic. According to her filing, I had publicly fabricated allegations maliciously implied unethical conduct and caused measurable financial harm to her company. Then I reached the paragraph that made my breath pause. She accused me of deliberately inventing claims about an affair in order to undermine her credibility. I had never once made that information public. Not to friends, not to colleagues, not to anyone outside the family. The only place the affair had been documented was in Dominic's divorce filing, which meant she had access to it, which meant it had been discussed under oath. The silence that had followed my legal response months ago hadn't been surrender. It had been preparation. I called my attorney immediately. "This is an escalation," she said bluntly. "She's trying to reframe you as unstable and vindictive. If she wins the narrative, it could shift public perception." "There's no narrative," I replied. "There's evidence." "Yes, but lawsuits aren't just about evidence. They're about leverage." Then she said something that tightened everything inside me. "If this gains media traction, Tesla may reevaluate Caius's contract. Public companies are sensitive to controversy, even peripheral involvement." The words settled like ice in my stomach. I had been ready to risk my relationship with my brother. I had been ready to risk being disliked. I had not been ready to risk my son's future. That night, I told Caius. He listened quietly. "No anger, no panic. If they ask me to sign a statement, I will," he said. "I'll tell them exactly what happened. You shouldn't have to. I know, but I will." There it was again. That instinct to protect me. "I won't let this touch your job," I said. He looked at me carefully. "Mom, if you back down now, she wins, and she'll use that version of events forever." He wasn't wrong, but the cost calculation had shifted. For days, I went back and forth in my own head, fight and risk collateral damage, or withdraw and allow her version to become permanent. In the end, the answer was simple. Silence had never protected us. My attorney and I began preparing for the preliminary hearing. We gathered everything. The seating chart emails from Christmas Eve. The messages where Isolde had written that Caius didn't align with the brand. Statements from a former household staff member who recalled Isolde describing my son as a liability in investor-facing environments. Then my attorney uncovered something neither of us had expected: financial transfers. Personal transfers from Cameron Holt into a marketing sub-account within Isolde's company. Not standard compensation, not properly documented, large enough to raise questions. If these were personal funds used to influence corporate presentation or secure internal support, my attorney said that's a conflict of interest. The room felt smaller. This could move beyond defamation, she added. The hearing was scheduled for mid-morning on a Tuesday. Walking into the courtroom felt nothing like entering that dining room on Christmas Eve. There were no chandeliers, no polished smiles, just wood benches, fluorescent lights, and the quiet authority of a judge reviewing paperwork. Isolde arrived with a team of attorneys. Tailored suit, perfect posture, controlled expression. She didn't look at me. Her lead counsel framed the case cleanly. My client built a respected development firm over years of disciplined work. The defendant publicly attacked her character, implied immoral conduct, and triggered investor withdrawal. He spoke of brand equity and reputational damage. When it was our turn, my attorney stood and laid out documentation calmly. We will show that the statements made by my client were factual, limited to direct observation, and directly connected to documented internal communications. Emails were submitted into evidence. Text messages projected onto a screen. Then the financial transfers were introduced. The room shifted. Even the judge leaned forward. These transfers, my attorney explained, coincide with internal board discussions regarding expansion strategy. They were not disclosed to shareholders. Isolde's attorney objected, but the judge allowed further review. Suddenly, the focus was no longer on my words at a dinner table. It was on her conduct in a boardroom. Dominic was called as a witness due to the overlap with the divorce proceedings. He spoke without flourish. Yes, he said, under oath, my former wife expressed concern that my nephew's employment could negatively affect investor perception. Yes, she directed him to remain outside the primary gathering area that evening. Yes, I was aware she prioritized investor image above family inclusion. There was no anger in his tone, just fact. By the end of the hearing, the judge ruled that the defamation claim lacked sufficient grounds to proceed. The documentation did not support malicious fabrication. Additionally, the court referred the financial records for review by a commercial oversight body. As we left the courtroom, I looked at Isolde for the first time that morning. For a brief second, the composure slipped. The strategy to paint me as reckless had exposed something she couldn't control. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady, and I understood something clearly. The last attempt to silence me had collapsed under its own weight. The consequences came in waves. Within weeks of the hearing, 2 major investors formally withdrew from one of Isolde's flagship developments. Local business publications reported on internal governance concerns and potential conflicts of interest within her firm. The headlines were measured, professional, but the impact was real. Cameron Holt resigned publicly, issuing a statement denying wrongdoing and framing the situation as misinterpreted financial collaboration. Her departure only deepened speculation. Shareholders demanded restructuring. Isolde lost operational control of several key divisions. I watched it unfold from a distance. I didn't celebrate. I didn't comment. It felt less like revenge and more like gravity finally being acknowledged. Dominic finalized the divorce quietly. Joint custody of Alara and Knox. Financial assets divided. Isolde retained partial equity, but not executive authority. One evening, Dominic came over for dinner. No luxury car this time. Just a standard sedan. No tailored suit. Jeans and a sweater. He helped set the table without being asked. There was no speech, no dramatic apology, just consistency. He had been showing up for a year now. Therapy appointments, parent-teacher conferences, coffee at our kitchen table, coding sessions with Knox, conversations with Alara about responsibility. He wasn't asking to be restored. He was rebuilding. Caius graduated top of his class that spring. The ceremony took place under a wide Colorado sky. Families gathered in folding chairs across the lawn. I spotted Dominic in the audience, early seated several rows back. Not in the reserved section, not near faculty, just present. Ilara and Knox sat beside him. When Caius walked across the stage, head-high diploma in hand, I felt something close in my chest, not from pride alone, but from relief. No one was being hidden. No one was being seated at the edge. After the ceremony, Dominic approached slowly. "You did this," he said to Caius. "No," Caius replied. "She did." He glanced at me. I shook my head. "You did." Tesla honored the full-time offer without hesitation. Caius moved to Austin that summer. On his first weekend there, he sent me a photo of his apartment, small, bright, functional. "I'm good," he texted. Back in Denver, Dominic implemented the standards he had promised. Ilara took a part-time job at a local bookstore. Knox worked 12 hours a week at a computer repair shop while continuing to study programming with Caius remotely. They complained at first, then they adjusted. Lessons rarely come from lectures. They come from consequence. One evening, months later, I found myself standing in my own garage, the same space that once symbolized exclusion. This time, I was replacing a worn brake pad on my old SUV. The garage smelled faintly of oil and dust. Ordinary, neutral. No folding chair in the corner, no son sitting quietly to protect me from discomfort. I leaned against the workbench and thought about the path from that cold concrete floor in Cherry Hills to the courtroom to graduation to Austin. That night in the garage had not only been about defending my son, it had been about ending a pattern. Children watch how we respond when we are diminished. If I had remained silent, I would have taught him to accept being pushed aside. Instead, I showed him that dignity has weight, and once claimed, it cannot be reassigned. No one could push us back into a corner again, not in a dining room, not in a courtroom, not anywhere. And maybe that's what stays with us long after the noise fades. Not the shattered glass, not the courtroom, not even the victory. What stays is the quiet moment when a child realizes they are not alone. We all face rooms where we feel smaller than we should, and sometimes the greatest gift we can give one another is simply refusing to let that smallness define us. There's no perfect family, no perfect response. We stumble, we hesitate, we learn. But when dignity is met with courage, something shifts. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to change the direction of a life. And in the end, that may be what truly matters, how we choose to show up for each other when it counts. If this story meant something to you, consider subscribing and becoming part of this space where we sit down, listen, and reflect together. And if you feel like sharing, leave a few lines in the comments about where you're listening from or what stayed with you tonight. Until next time, take care of yourselves and the people who matter most. We'll meet again soon.